Tributes and welcome back to Hunger Games Chronicles. It's been a while, but remember that I'll be posting on or the weekend before the 15th of each month. Today we're gonna be listening to the 116th to the 125th Hunger Games, and be sure to like and subscribe and try to share the link of this video so more people can enjoy this channel. Good job on helping me achieve 76 subscribers. Let's try to get to 100. Just a secret, my goal is at least 15,000 subs, but I don't think we're going to achieve that. Anyways, let's continue. The 116th games took place in the year 138 in a pinewood forest. They featured wolves, a tornado, and lasted for 10 days. This year's victor won partly due to his good looks and partly because of his strategy of winning these games, which earned him his victor's nickname. This year's victor was Ashen Kapoor, aged 16, from District 7. With his wavy black hair, light brown skin, and blazing black eyes, there was not one viewer who did not notice Ashen during the tribute parade. He made quite the impression during the parade, and even President Flickerman paused during his speech as he saw the handsome young man from District 7 dressed as an oak tree. Unfortunately for Ashen, his impression on the crowd made his district partner, Sylvia, jealous. Despite their mentor, Asha Seetal, trying to make them work together, Sylvia continually refused to work with Ashen. The night before the interviews, Sylvia smuggled an axe from her individual training session with the game makers, and while Ashen slept, she attacked him. However, Ashen immediately woke up and began fighting with Sylvia, which alerted Asha and caused her to attack Sylvia. Due to this attempted murder, Sylvia was withdrawn from this year's games, and we have no longer found any records of her later life, although it is suggested that she was made an Avox. During the bloodbath, Ashen did not hesitate and immediately ran into the cornucopia. He grabbed several throwing axes and managed to kill the muscular Jurgen from 2, before turning and running away from the cornucopia. He was initially chased by Bruta from 2, who was enraged that Ashen had killed her district partner, but Adorn from 1 grabbed Bruta and told her Ashen was not a threat as of now. Bruta appeared annoyed by this and asked Adorn what he meant, but this gave Ashen enough time to escape. After running for almost 2 hours without stopping, Ashen finally decided to rest and sat down, resting his back against a tree. He set a base, and using his skills from District 7, he created a wall with numerous pinewood trees and slept with the comfort of knowing that this shelter would stop the careers, especially the vindictive Bruta, who was attempting to kill him as revenge for Jurgen's death, from reaching him. In return for his skills, Ashen earned sponsor gifts almost every day, containing bread and water. He then laid low for the next few days in his own shelter, but was awoken on the 7th day by the sound of branches cracking. He immediately stood up before hearing numerous wolves snarling as they ran towards his camp. He stayed in the shelter and the wolves ran past him, but suddenly heard more growls as one wolf ran back in his direction. He squeezed his eyes shut and braced himself for an attack, but instead noticed the wolf running past him. He then heard a tiny sob and rolled his eyes, before peeking over his shelter and seeing a tiny boy being chased by the wolf. The boy was Talon from 10, a 13-year-old boy who had a speech impairment and could not speak. Ashen had allegedly had an accident with Talon during training, but contrary to expectations, he gulped, before jumping out of his shelter and throwing an axe at the wolf chasing Talon. The wolf immediately died, and Talon placed a hand over his mouth, before signing something to Ashen. Ashen did not understand this, however, and instead said that he was sorry for accidentally hurting Talon during training. Talon appeared pleased by Ashen's apology and grinned at Ashen, before signing that he had accepted his apology. Ashen repeated that he was sorry, before asking if Talon wanted to stay with him. However, before Talon could reply, Ashen sliced the claws of the wolf off with his axe and placed them over his own hand. He then cut up the wolf's body and placed a skin around Talon's body in an attempt to protect him from the cold night. They laid low for the next few days and used sign language, comparing their lives back in District 7 and 10. Ashen spoke about the lumber mill accident that had killed his parents the previous year, whilst Talon signed that his family back in District 10 had to work in a slaughterhouse for a living, which Ashen was appalled by. The next day, Ashen was gifted with a fishing pole and used it to grab some fish from the lake in the forest. He and Talon ate the fish, which they found quite delicious, and remained in the same spot. They decided to go explore the arena and attempt to find the 6 careers, but to their surprise they could not find them. They walked further towards the perimeter and then back towards their shelter, but as they came closer towards the shelter, a branch hit Ashen in the head. They quickly realized a tornado was coming their way and turned and ran, with Ashen throwing Talon over his shoulder as they did so. More branches hit Ashen, but he ignored the pair and continued running, determined to escape the tornado. They eventually escaped and both fell asleep as 6 cannons rang out, leaving only the 2 of them, as well as Adorned and Bruta, alive. The next morning, Ashen was awoken by a yelp as Talon was lifted into the air by Adorned and Bruta. As Bruta grabbed Ashen, Talon tried to sign something, but Adorned quickly snapped his neck, which made Ashen gasp as his cannon sounded. Fueled by rage, Ashen rammed into Adorned and bashed his head so hard into the ground that his cannon immediately sounded. Ashen then examined the wolf's claws remaining on his hand and sliced Bruta's neck repeatedly until he finally died, leaving him as the winner. After his victory, Ashen returned to District 7, where he was nicknamed Wolf, and started a successful timber business. He allegedly regretted not being able to save Talon, but still maintained a good relationship with previous Hunger Games victors of the Reconstruction era. The 117th Games took place in Roman ruins. They featured friendly goats, floods, and lasted for 9 days. As was the case with a select few previous arenas, the game makers had to put aside a small fortune in order to build this arena representing an ancient city for this year's games. This year's victor was an 18-year-old from District 2 named Daphne Flint. Noticing that this year's arena was similar to District 2, Daphne and her district runner Octavius decided to leave the career pack early. Despite being splattered with the blood of various tributes during the bloodbath, Daphne managed to grab a set of throwing knives and immediately ran to help Octavius finish off numerous tributes in the central courtyard of the arena. Many tributes died in the bloodbath from tripping and banging their head on the stairs of the grand courtyard, whilst others were killed by Daphne and Octavius. They decided to set up a base in the middle of the cornucopia courtyard. This was due to the rest of the careers fleeing the bloodbath to escape them. This gave the pair an immense advantage over the other tributes, as they spent most of their time rationing food and drink from the cornucopia. During the night of the first day, 3 tributes entered the cornucopia, before being slayed by Octavius and Daphne. Daphne and Octavius waited in the cornucopia for the next few days until they spotted the tributes from 1 and 4 in a nearby tower. Daphne and Octavius decided to follow them for the next day, stealing their food in order to weaken them as a pack. This pack was disunited without the District 2 tributes to ensure their cooperation, which pleased Daphne and Octavius. On day 8, the floods began and Octavius and Daphne had to climb up a nearby tower in order to escape them. However, they still observed the flood and noticed that the flooding was not actually that heavy, and the floods only reached the waists of most short tributes. Once the initial flooding was over, Daphne and Octavius slayed even more tributes with their knives, and this lowered the playing field by some degree. However, the rain began once again and the flooding continued. After the flooding was over, Daphne and Octavius followed the career tributes through the continuing rain, and they snuck up behind the 4 of them and grinned at each other. Lightning suddenly struck repeatedly, which caused the 4 tributes from 1 and 4 to yelp, and they desperately tried to find shelter, but then encountered Daphne and Octavius, who brutally stabbed all 4 of them to death. After the killing of the tributes from Districts 1 and 4, only 4 tributes remained, with only Daphne and Octavius in their prime fighting condition. And the next day they killed the other 2 tributes before turning on each other. Daphne ultimately won by slamming Octavius's head repeatedly into a concrete pillar. District 2 was originally upset with Daphne for killing Octavius, whose father was a Castro and whose mother was a Dalton. Even Daphne's mentor, Lucius Castro, was upset with Daphne for killing his cousin's son. However, they eventually praised Daphne for her victory and she went on to get married and open a stone quarry. The 118th Games took place in Sunflower Fields, featuring slimy snails, poisonous gas, and lasting 12 days. There was nothing very special about this year's games, which made it unappealing to capital audience members, which made it one of the most boring games in Hunger Games history. This year's victor was a 17-year-old from District 1 named Brandy Knott. After an argument with her district partner and 3 of the other careers during training, Brandy decided that it would be best she did not have to rely on her allies in the arena. When the gong sounded, she immediately ran away from the cornucopia and grabbed a water bottle a fleeing tribute had dropped. She spent the first week of the games roaming around the many fields of sunflowers and surprised her mentor Azora Asimov by how long she survived without her allies. However, this led to Brandy isolating herself from the other tributes, due to the fear of being found by the others. However, the game makers did not enjoy this boring tribute and instead triggered some bugs, which stung Brandy and made her walk away, which led her to Felix from 14. Without him noticing, she crawled in the fields and slowly followed him, grabbing a loaf of bread that he dropped by accident. However, 14 tributes still remained after the first week of the games, and so the game makers decided that poison gas would soon be released into the arena, and tributes would need to get a mask from the cornucopia. Brandy was lucky enough to reach the cornucopia first and grabbed her mask, before Felix arrived and grabbed his moments after Brandy left. After placing the mask on, Brandy suddenly realized that the arena was now becoming dark from the poison gas, but appeared relatively unfazed by this, and continued walking until she felt tired and sat down. However, after resting in the fields in the dark for a few hours, Brandy heard footsteps approaching her hiding spot. These footsteps belonged to Ryan from 12, who had used a pair of night vision goggles to track down numerous other hiding tributes before killing them with his axe. He threw the axe into Brandy's shoulder, which made her scream, but as Ryan was about to kill her, a snail wiggled on his foot. He gasped in disgust and accidentally dropped his axe, and Brandy quickly ripped off his oxygen mask. He yelped, but his screams were soon silenced as he began coughing and dropped to his knees. Brandy then stabbed him with his own axe, before snatching his goggles and placing them around her eyes, in order not to be snuck up on again. After going for 7 days without encountering any of her allies, Brandy encountered Alexander from 1 and Excalibur from 2, who had split up from the career pack in order to find other tributes on the 8th day. Brandy glanced at Alexander and Excalibur, before slowly following them without making any noise. Just then, 3 more cannons sounded in unison, belonging to tributes who had been killed by the District 4 tributes. Alexander grinned at Excalibur before stabbing him with his sword, sounding his cannon. As the hovercraft retrieved Excalibur's body, Brandy tackled Alexander to the ground, and as he shouted obscenities at her, she beheaded him, killing him seconds later. Only 5 tributes remained by the 11th day of the games, and with so little tributes remaining, Brandy suspected that the game makers would lead the tributes back to the cornucopia in order for the final showdown to take place. Her guess turned out to be correct when on the 12th day of the games, the game makers announced that the tributes needed to make it back to the cornucopia in 10 minutes, otherwise their trackers would be detonated. Brandy reached the cornucopia extremely quickly and hid in the mouth of the cornucopia before 2 cannons sounded, belonging to the District 4 tributes after they had not made it back to the cornucopia in time and their trackers had been detonated. It was ultimately Felix and Eliana from 2 who made it back to the cornucopia, and they began a fight with their swords. Felix finally managed to behead Eliana, and he walked back from her body, cheering out, muttering that this was the first time District 14 had won. But just then, Brandy jumped on top of Felix and pinned him to the ground, before stabbing him repeatedly in the chest as he shouted obscenities at her. After achieving victory, Brandy returned to District 1, but to her surprise, her mentor was not very happy with her, and the population of District 1 despised her. Many Panemians believed that Felix or Alexander should have emerged victorious. Brandy therefore decided not to mentor any future tributes, leaving the task to Azora, Asimov, and Champagne Vasey. The 109th games took place in an abandoned aquarium, featuring an alligator prowl, a blackout, and lasting for 16 days. These games will always be remembered for the outlying pack and the iconic deaths that occurred due to the many animals released. This year's victor was a 14-year-old from District 10 named Xerxes Fallen. During the bloodbath, Xerxes and the other members of the outlying packs laid numerous tributes between them. But Xerxes grabbed a tiny pouch, and despite not being aware of the contents of this pouch, Xerxes decided that he would hide the fact that he had this pouch from the other outliers. Over the next few days of the games, Xerxes and the 5 other members of the outlying pack of Districts 9, 10, and 11 rested on the top of a huge tank that had once held various fish. This tank had plenty of bars that had been used by previous zookeepers, and this worked out to the advantage of the outliers as they could observe the arena, although they did not kill any tributes in this time. Every 2 hours, they noticed that numerous alligators, turtles, and otters would walk past this building, but the outliers did not understand the significance of this until Bree from 6 was chased and killed by a merciless alligator as she ran away from these animals, which disgusted the outliers. After a few days of only the careers killing other tributes, Xerxes and the other members of the outlying pack decided to roam around the arena, and a few minutes after the bi-hourly prowling of the alligators, otters, and turtles. As they walked past the shark tank, they were suddenly hit with knives from behind, all at the same time. Xerxes, Panlo from 9, and Ruta from 11 were only hit in their arms and survived, whilst Quinoa from 9, Frida from 10, and Till from 11 were all hit in their heads with the knives and died in a matter of seconds. The surviving outliers turned around, only to see that the courier pack was right behind them. Panlo and Ruta shouted at Xerxes to stay where he was. They ran towards the nearest exit in order to slay the fleeing couriers, but they had already run into the elevator of this aquarium, which took them to a higher floor. Xerxes swore and immediately ran up the nearest stairwell to the lift, before encountering all 6 of the couriers, and once they saw the many weapons Xerxes had, they walked back into the lift, but Panlo and Ruta were already on the bottom floor of the aquarium, awaiting the couriers. Close to 2 hours later, Xerxes, Panlo, and Ruta noticed that the alligators, turtles, and otters were slowly making their way towards the aquarium. Xerxes shouted a warning to Panlo and Ruta, and then sent the elevator down to their floor. Panlo and Ruta then let the couriers run out, and the 2 of them ran into the elevator, whilst each of the couriers were killed by the alligators, except for Ferris from 2. 9 tributes still remained by day 14, and so a blackout was hence triggered by the game makers. Most tributes decided to stick around, due to them not wanting to accidentally stray into the vision of the intimidating alligators, turtles, and otters. However, Xerxes finally decided to open his tiny pouch and saw that it contained night vision goggles, which he placed over his eyes, whilst Panlo and Ruta argued about what they would do next. Xerxes held a sword in each hand, and as Panlo and Ruta continued arguing, he slit their throats from behind simultaneously, killing them. After waking up the next day, it was still dark to his surprise, and so he decided to roam around the arena, and he killed Flax from 8 and Carla from 12, neither of whom even noticed him approaching them. 3 tributes still remained by the 16th day of the games, and so the sun finally rose and the game makers announced that they were breaking the barriers of the river in the arena, as well as the tank containing an extremely large shark. They were mentioning that alligators and crocodiles were now being directed to the tributes trackers. Tarn from 7 was eaten by merciless crocodiles, while Xerxes and Ferris had the final duel in the cornucopia. Xerxes was stabbed 3 times in the stomach, but he eventually slit Ferris's throat and won. After his victory, Xerxes returned to District 10 a hero and got married, before mentoring the tributes of District 10 alongside Autumn Spidel until another tribute won and took over Autumn's role as the mentor for the female tribute of District 10. The 120th games took place in the year 142 and were the 9th quinquennial quell. For the 120th games, President Flickerman made a live appearance on TV. Despite already being in his 50s, Flickerman was still muscular as ever, and his black hair did not have a single hair of white in it. After applause in the Snow Square, Flickerman bowed and announced that, in order to remind the rebels that women chose to fight alongside men in the previous rebellions, 2 female tributes will instead be reaped from each district, rather than just 1 male and 1 female tribute. This year's victor was an 18-year-old from District 10 named Carmen Ivanova. During the interviews and even during training, Carmen casually mentioned that she was more attracted to women than men and that her girlfriend Lupe had been reaped alongside her. She also joked that the other girls in her district and school would occasionally taunt her due to her being lesbian, but she also muttered that she would prove them wrong when she won this year's quinquennial quell. This impressed capital audiences, and it is also noted that the 6 female career tributes could be seen grinning at each other and jerking their heads towards Carmen and Lupe. Meanwhile, the elderly Rubius Dalton thanked Carmen for her time and she grinned, while several lesbian women in the crowd shouted that they would be sponsoring her and Lupe. This year's games took place in the Danxia Valley, featuring various tracker detonations and lasting for 7 days. Once the games began, Carmen immediately looked over to find Lupe, but was unable to do so and instead managed to grab some soup and water from the cornucopia, and managed to climb the rocks, which led her to the top of the valley. This gave her enough shelter, and she was able to see almost all of the arena and most of the tributes, whilst also keeping her distance from them. On the first night of the games, Carmen was gifted with an unusual chainsaw from sponsors. This kindness turned out to be extremely beneficial from Carmen when 5 bears crept up into her hiding spot and they tried to attack her. However, she easily decapitated all 5 of them with her chainsaw quickly. She then cooked all 5 of them and made sure they were not undercooked, before making a quick soup with them. Her way of thinking impressed capital viewers, who marked her as a strong contender. As the next few days went by, Carmen roamed the valley looking for Lupe, but instead managed to kill Augusta from 6 and Bobina from 8. But she did not appear to care and instead continued searching for Lupe. Her determination to find her partner impressed capital audiences, who sent more gifts for Carmen. On the 4th day, Carmen appeared to have caught sight of Lupe, but then a rockfall began and she was nearly crushed by the boulders. Carmen screamed and immediately ran across the top of the valley in order to escape the falling rocks, and had almost escaped when she tripped over a shoelace. She swore for a second before tumbling down the valley and painfully hitting her head on a rock. She glanced up to see Lupe and Artulia from 2, the latter of whom watched with a smirk as Carmen fell. Lupe held the chainsaw to Carmen's throat, but whispered that she would be saving her later on. Carmen nodded and thanked Lupe, whilst Artulia began asking her if she had any information on any of the other tributes. However, Carmen did not give Artulia an answer, and she rolled her eyes, before asking Carmen if she really thought that Lupe actually cared about her. As Carmen clenched her fist, Lupe made an obscene gesture with her hands towards Artulia, before saying she was a loyal girlfriend and throwing her chainsaw at Artulia, which knocked her head off of her neck, killing her instantly. Due to the rockfall now having moved far from them, Carmen and Lupe both took off their clothes and leaned against a rock before kissing. As they became more and more intimate, however, it was noticed by capital viewers that both Carmen and Lupe were reaching for their chainsaws. However, Carmen reached hers first, before apologizing to Lupe and slamming the chainsaw into her chest and throwing her down the hill, which killed her instantly and made Carmen burst into tears. With just 4 tributes remaining, Carmen decided that the game makers would probably call the tributes back into the cornucopia, and so she returned there, after eating a lot of bears and preparing herself for the final day of the games. The game maker soon announced that more rockfalls would be triggered, and all tributes needed to make it back to the cornucopia or their trackers would be detonated. Carmen grinned, realizing that she would not need to run, and stayed in the cornucopia as 2 cannons sounded, belonging to Terra from 12 and Vita from 14, after they had been crushed by boulders during the rockfalls. The other girls from District 2, Eugenia, soon ran inside and looked around for Carmen. However, Carmen immediately grabbed Eugenia and knocked her to the ground by slapping her on the back of the head. As Eugenia swore and hit the ground, Carmen snarled at her before slamming the chainsaw into her back, which killed Eugenia and left her as the victor. After her victory, Carmen was known to have regret having had to kill Lupe in the arena and also had frequent nightmares from what she had done in the arena, but with the support of her young mentor, Xerxes Fallen, she slowly got over the nightmares and went on to move to the capital, living a fulfilling life. The 121st Games took place in a poisoned forest, featuring Anaconda's acidic rain and lasting for 7 days. This year's victor has been fondly remembered as a toxic boy, a nickname he truly deserves. This year's victor was a 16-year-old from District 8 named Braden Van Aard. As soon as the tributes were risen into the arena, Braden noticed that he and his district partner, a close childhood friend named Tafeta, were fortunate enough to be on either side of another tribute and signaled to each other using sign language. When the gong sounded, Braden and Tafeta ran inwards before grabbing a bottle of water, a loaf of bread, and a small pickaxe before running into the nearby trees. As Braden and Tafeta sprinted through the trees, they suddenly leapt backwards as a cannon sounded and Braden's shoulder-length side-cut hair was sent flying as a hovercraft arrived 20 meters in front of the pair from 8 in order to collect the body of Caitlin from 10. Braden and Tafeta ran towards the hovercraft and Braden jumped up, retrieving a knife Caitlin had, before glancing at the blood spilling from her mouth. Both Braden and Tafeta winced at the sight of this blood, but Tafeta suddenly noticed a half-eaten grape fallen out of Caitlin's mouth. Braden jumped back in disgust, but soon realized that the food in this arena was not reliable and not to be trusted, so they had to ration out the bread for 3 more days, which caused their stomachs to growl, due to them both being poor from an upmarket part of District 8 and not used to being hungry. However, on the 4th day, Braden remembered a bowl of soup he had seen in the cornucopia during the bloodbath 3 days prior, and so he and Tafeta ran back to the cornucopia, but narrowly avoided encountering the courier back, which had now just accepted the powerful tributes of District 7, meaning that there were now 8 members of the courier pack. The pair snarled and turned to leave, but just an ardor from one ran out of the cornucopia and shouted at someone to stop. The pair turned around and saw that Joanne from 11 had just grabbed some bread from the cornucopia and was now fleeing. Braden smirked at Taffeta as they glanced back at the fleeing Joanne, who had noticed them and was begging for their help. However, Ardor glared at him and threw his arm back to launch a trident, which made Braden smile sadly at Joanne. However, Taffeta soon reminded Braden that Joanne was a plant nerd and she could pick out their food for them. Braden nodded, before running down the hills and blocking Joanne from escaping Ardor. Braden muttered that she had to join in the alliance, and seeing Ardor preparing to throw a trident, Joanne squealed and nodded at Braden, before jumping on his back as Taffeta threw her axe at Ardor's neck, which killed him instantly. Taffeta retrieved the axe and the trio fled. The next day, only 10 tributes remained, and after sunrise, Braden and Taffeta and Joanne ate some bread before running towards the perimeter. However, the acidic rainfall soon began. All 3 of the tributes screamed in pain, whilst Braden placed his jacket over Taffeta's body in an attempt to protect her from the rain. The trio then reached a nearby pond, which they lunged into. This seemed to be a good idea, as this protected the trio from the pain. After the trio had been hiding underwater for 45 minutes, Joanne suddenly screamed and jumped to the surface. It was revealed by the underwater cameras that an anaconda twisted its body around Joanne's ankle and then pulled on it, which caused her to twist it. Joanne screamed in pain, but Braden and Taffeta did not notice this and instead glanced around, realizing that the acidic rain had finally stopped. Braden helped Taffeta out and then glanced back at Joanne, but just then several anacondas appeared from the water and made their way towards Joanne. Braden and Taffeta nudged each other and glanced at Joanne, who was now shouting for their help. But as the anaconda slithered closer to Joanne, Braden and Taffeta apologized to her, before grabbing each other and running. Joanne continued crying and shouted as many obscenities as she knew at the District 8 tributes, making obscene gestures with her hands. However, Braden and Taffeta rolled their eyes and smiled sadly at Joanne, before her cannon soon sounded. Once they had escaped the anacondas, Braden and Taffeta rested, and using the information about poisonous fruits that Joanne had given them, they ate happily. By the 5th day of the games, only 5 tributes remained, among whom were Braden and Taffeta. The 2 tributes continued eating the bread and mentioned that one from District 8 deserved to win this year, whilst Braden muttered that his uncle had been killed in the previous games. Taffeta comforted Braden and he smiled at her, before mentioning that he would find some food. He quickly snatched a leaf that he knew was poisonous, before folding it up and cutting the bread into sliced pieces with his pickaxe and making a quick sandwich. He served the sandwich to Taffeta and she gladly escaped, thanking Braden for cooking. He told her he did this all the time back in District 8, before taking a bite of the sandwich. He then stuck his head in a nearby lake and spat out the bite he had just taken, which made Taffeta frown. However, she soon vomited and grabbed her throat, asking Braden what he had done. He stood over her, saying only one could win, and she called him an obscene word, before she succumbed to the poison and her cannon sounded. Braden grinned, before failing to notice that Palmyra from 1 was observing him. Palmyra suddenly jumped towards Braden with her knife, but he saw her approaching at the last second and blocked her attack with his axe. He turned and ran towards the thick foliage, shouting for help, but then he noticed Palmyra charging towards him again. He threw himself to the ground and began crawling through the glass whilst Palmyra snarled and walked towards him, standing directly above him and shouting that he had killed her district partner. He grinned, saying it had not been him, but threw his sandwich into Palmyra's mouth. He then placed a hand around her mouth so she could not spit it out and pinched her nose so that she would have to swallow. She swallowed the poison and slowly began convulsing on the ground until her cannon sounded. Braden now knew that only 2 tributes remained, apart from him, and he slowly grinned. Realizing that the showdown was now approaching and that he could bring a victory back to District 8, he immediately ran into the cornucopia, and after noticing snakes entering the clearing, he turned around and saw the only remaining courier, Twigo, grinning ready to throw an axe. Braden and Twigo quickly climbed up to the top of the cornucopia and began dueling with their axes. However, Braden had faster reflexes than Twigo, and despite the latter being a career tribute, Braden managed to throw him off the cornucopia and into the hissing snakes. He groaned in happiness, realizing only 1 tribute remained. However, just then, Roberta from 14 jumped out from behind him and tackled him to the ground of the roof, having been hiding a few meters underneath. Braden quickly shouted out, his axe fell into the cornucopia. Despite being pushed off the roof, he hung on with the tips of his fingers and groaned in vain, pushing himself up and kicking Roberta in the face. He then insulted her, before throwing her into the hissing snakes, emerging victorious. Just a day after his victory, Braden and Tafeta's older sister had a brawl in a bar, which saw Braden get his face repeatedly smashed into the ground. Although he survived and became addicted to alcohol, described as doing nothing, despite being a mentor. The 122nd Games took place in a bosque featuring lethal porcupines, hallucinogenic smoke, and lasting for 13 days. This year's Games reminded Capital viewers and future tributes alike that one must only need the will to survive in order to win the Games. This year's victor was a 15-year-old from District 9 named Maisie Sickle. Due to being the smallest tribute this year despite being 15, Maisie was already scared. However, she managed to ally herself with the 8 career tributes, but for some reason decided that she would abandon him as soon as the Games began. She made an agreement with Blossom from 7, stating that she would cover her during the bloodbath, but as soon as the Games began, she grabbed a knife and turned and ran, which made Blossom shout out. Just then, Louise from 14 ran behind Blossom and slit her throat, which angered Oaken from 7 and made Maisie a target for him. Maisie ran to the arena without clicking back and killed several porcupines, before using their poisonous spikes and attaching them to a branch, therefore managing to create a makeshift mace. As the evening approached, Maisie heard shrieks coming from nearby, and as she walked towards the sound of the shrieking, she noticed Louise standing over a syntax from tree and slowly cutting into his leg for information. Maisie immediately slammed her mace into the back of Louise's head, which killed him instantly, saving Syntax. Maisie pointed her mace at Syntax and asked him for an alliance. He had no choice but to accept, and Maisie showed Syntax her mace. Syntax warned her not to eat the spikes, but Maisie rolled her eyes and she said that she had gone on a television spree with her mentor, Tritica MacDonald, watching every single Hunger Games in 1 week. Syntax nodded and told Maisie she was clever, and they spent the next few days roaming the open arena and sharing food and taking turns to keep watch and sleep. On the 9th day of the Games, only 10 tributes were made, and so the game makers announced that the hallucinogenic smoke would be released into the arena, and the only way the tributes could escape it was to retrieve goggles from the cornucopia that would prevent them from being mentally tortured by the smoke. The trio ran towards the cornucopia clearing, and Maisie yanked a spike from her mace before squeezing some poison out. The pair had been close to the cornucopia and were subsequently the first to arrive. Syntax grabbed her goggles whilst Maisie squeezed the poison into goggles, which would cause the poison to flow into the eyes of the tributes and cause them to die quickly. Syntax glanced at Maisie as she emptied the poison into the goggles, but before he could get her to move, he suddenly noticed Oaken, Grain from 9, and Farah from 1 approaching the cornucopia with their weapons at the ready. Maisie swore and she squeezed the last bit of the poison into the 6th mask, before Oaken threw an axe towards her, shouting that she had killed Blossom, but Maisie dodged it. Oaken threw his arm back to launch another axe, but Syntax grabbed Maisie and they ran out of the cornucopia. Once Maisie and Syntax made it out of the cornucopia, they noticed Farah hacking Grain to death with a knife, whilst Oaken grabbed a non-poisoned pair of goggles and ran away, whilst Farah was unable to do so and shrieked as she heard the screams of her younger sister. Most tributes were killed by Oaken, whilst others grabbed poisoned goggles. Although the 64-year-old commentator Ruby S. Dalton announced that it had not been necessary for the tributes to grab goggles in the first place. Either way, only Maisie, Syntax, Oaken, Anna from 14, and Rupert from 11 remained by 10th day. The next day, it was revealed that Anna had been unable to find a reliable source of water and hence died of thirst, whilst Rupert announced Oaken and was decapitated, despite putting up a strong fight. Maisie and Syntax agreed that they would stay with each other in order to fight Oaken, and so on the 12th day, the game makers started a fire behind the pair and they quickly ran, realizing that the game makers were obviously trying to bring the 3 remaining tributes together. However, as they ran, Maisie grinned sadly and thanked Syntax for his help, but as he spun around, she pushed him to the ground. They fought for a few seconds until Maisie managed to snap his neck, leaving his dead body on the ground and running back to the cornucopia. She held her mace tightly as she had the final fight with Oaken, and although he managed to amputate one of her hands, he was smacked repeatedly in the neck by her mace, leaving her as the winner. The next year, whilst performing the reaping in District 3, Maisie was electrocuted by Syntax's older sisters. It is known that they dragged her to an underground room and tortured her, shouting that they had killed her brother, but they were soon shot dead by peacekeepers and Maisie was rescued. After recovering from this attack, Maisie moved to the capital and opened up more bakeries owned by Whimsywick Waffles, which she partly owned. However, she later had an accident with a cropper that caused her to lose an arm. The 123rd Games took place in an abandoned fort, featuring vicious eagles, a mud chase, and lasting for 11 days. The arena this year saw for an extremely amusing spectacle and is considered one of the most favorite games of all times for capital citizens. This year's victor was a 14-year-old from District 6 named Ivo Naxel. During the bloodbath, Ivo stayed on his podium for a few seconds before running towards the cornucopia, but as Dina from 5 fell to the ground with a knife in her bag, Ivo tripped over her body and banged his chin on the ground and cried out, but got to his feet and darted to the mount, grabbing some bread in the process, zigzagging out of the clearing and gasping in fear. He spent the next few days moving away from the other tributes without looking back, but later revealing that he had wanted to escape the other tributes, as he was one of the youngest in this year's lineup. For unknown reasons, the careers this year decided that the tributes from 4 and 7 would split up from the main pack and set up their own camps, before rejoining the main pack after a few days. On the second night, Ivo stumbled upon one of the 2 bases, which had been set up by Barker and Jan, both from 7. Barker and Jan suddenly began arguing over a water bottle they had unknowingly dropped to the ground. Whilst the pair started arguing, Ivo ran towards them and grabbed the bottle. But as he ran, Barker suddenly turned around and prepared to throw an axe. But as it flew towards Ivo, he quickly ducked and ran down the hills of the fort, before hiding near the lake. A few days later, Ivo was walking through the hills when he suddenly turned around and saw the crews from 1 and 2 running after him. Ivo sprinted as fast as he could, whilst the District 4 tribute suddenly joined the pairs from 1 and 2 in the chase. Ivo noticed Kala from 11 walking through the valley. He then glanced back at the couriers before snarling and tackling Kala to the ground. Despite scouring through all the rocks for more than 10 minutes in order to find Ivo, the 6 couriers snarled and all marched past the rocks they were hiding behind, continually shouting at each other and discussing where the glasses boy was. As he insulted Ivo's glasses, he held them in his hands before placing them back on his slim nose. The couriers soon left, much to the relief of Ivo and Kala, who appeared to realize that Ivo would try to protect and hide her from the couriers. The 2 of them agreed to become allies with each other, and due to Ivo's intelligence and Kala's muscular build, the elderly Rubius Dalton agreed that this alliance would work in their favor. They turned in the opposite direction and ran from the couriers, before deciding to set up a base near the top of the main fort. The next day, Kala went to bed first and made Ivo take watch as he rolled his eyes and sat back. He noticed a small dagger in her belt and he snatched it without her knowledge or consent and hid it in his own pocket. He later revealed that he had never planned to kill her, but he just wanted to defend himself if she tried to attack him. Only 8 tributes remained on day 7, including Ivo and Kala, and so numerous months were released from the cornucopia to target the remaining 8 tributes. Ivo and Kala were already near the top of one of the forts and quickly helped each other make it to the top of the fort, where they remained safe there. The months remained at the bottom of the fort and began barking at the pair, whilst Kala and Ivo had to keep watch and defend themselves from the incoming eagles. They did, however, manage to protect themselves from the eagles by slamming and throwing bricks at them, which they had ripped with great pain and difficulty from the roof of the fort. Eventually, the mutts were withdrawn by the game makers, and the pair realized that they were just two of just 6 tributes remaining. In order to have a better look at all of the other tributes and to be able to defend themselves in advance in the case of future attacks, both from tributes and animals, they climbed up to the top of one of the highest forts by using tiny footholds in the wall, where they stayed for the next couple of days and shared information about their lives back in the districts, with Ivo revealing that his parents had died in a hovercraft crash and he lived alone, sometimes taking morphine. When the game makers announced that only 3 tributes remained, Ivo and Kala decided to split up in order to fight the muscular Barker, who was their only remaining opponent and clearly the strongest of the 3. As Ivo climbed down the fort, however, Barker suddenly climbed up and stood directly behind Kala. Barker suddenly grabbed Calla from behind and as she screamed for help, Ivo turned around and Barker tried to strangle her. After becoming irritated with the strong fight she was giving, Barker snapped Calla's neck and turned towards Ivo. Ivo swore and slowly walked backwards, but misjudged his footing and fell, managing to grab one of the footholds and slowly pulled himself up whilst Barker arrogantly cheered out, thinking that Arlo had hit the ground. However, Ivo got up and threw the dagger at Barker, which hit him in the back. He growled and turned around, but Ivo kicked him in the head and he fell off the fort to his death. After his victory, Ivo became addicted to morphling, but eventually got over this addiction and got married, having 3 children. The 124th games proved that sometimes intelligence from a tribute is much stronger than the sharpest axe. In the past 2 years, it had been noticed that the youths of District 7, known as the runner-up district, were being gradually accepted into the career pack and seemed to always put on strong fights in the games, with 2 of their tributes in the past 2 years having made it to the final 2 and had simply been killed due to luck on the hands of the other tributes making it to the final. The district soon decided that in order to choose which of the youths would represent their district in the games, an axe throwing competition would be held and the volunteer who could throw their axe the longest distance would represent their district in the games. This year's victor was an 18-year-old from District 7 named Emma Duvall. Emma was the oldest of 3 siblings and immediately volunteered before Ivo and Axel had even announced the name of the female tribute. She took a breath before Ashton Kapoor told her that she could throw her axe. She launched the axe and it flew about 20 meters, which made Emma cheer and earned her the role of female tribute. The boy tribute was 17-year-old Bob Maltox, an extremely muscular boy. During the interviews, Emma stated that she just wanted to see how many tributes she could kill in one go, which proprietor elderly Rubius Dalton would please the audience. This year's games took place in Antelope Canyon, featuring antelopes and a immunity pill chase lasting for 7 days. All 8 careers decided that in order to cover more ground, after the bloodbath they would split up in groups of 2, Emma agreeing to be placed with Bomb, and they roamed the arena for a few days, acting very cautious to make sure that no tributes were following them. However, they soon began having fun with the slots in the canyon. They spent a few minutes each day sliding down the slot, but soon found this childish and instead walked on. However, Bomb suddenly thought he had heard a tribute and threw his axe at the slot. However, the axe bounced back and nearly hit Bomb, but he threw himself to the ground and gasped. Emma and Bomb both saw that the axe was emitting sparks and they both leapt back, but were muttering to themselves. Bomb appeared too scared to grab the axe, as it was still emitting sparks. However, Carl from 12 did not notice him and walked straight towards him, but then was thrown backwards by the force field and died soon after. This made Emma and Bomb realize that there were numerous force fields inside the arena to separate numerous sectors. Then that night, Emma and Bomb finally touched the axe and Bomb shouted that it was hot, but Emma ignored him and told him that they could manage. A sponsor gift floated down to them, holding gloves to them. Emma and Bomb put on the gloves and then touched the axe before realizing that the gloves prevented their hands from burning. They immediately ran towards the force field to test this out, but just then they saw Linus from Tree slowly approaching them and he asked them for some of their fruit. Emma and Bomb burst into laughter and asked the emaciated boy if he had any idea he was talking to career tribute. Linus burst into tears and pleaded for help, before Bomb suddenly noticed a wire in his pocket and nudged Emma, before nodding at Linus and letting him join their alliance. The next morning, all 3 of them, although mainly Linus, came up with a plan to use the force field energy to kill other tributes. Emma and Bomb did not pay much attention to Linus and instead shared a burger that they had taken from the cornucopia. However, Linus immediately shouted at the pair to pay attention, which angered Bomb and he pointed his axe at Linus before pretending to behead himself. This appeared to scare Linus and he snarled at the pair before announcing that he was placing a wire near the force field and that he needed their gloves. Emma and Bomb both rolled their eyes, but Bomb took off his gloves and handed them to Linus. As Linus looked, Emma and Bomb walked away and discussed killing Linus. After placing the wire inside the force field, Linus searched for Emma and Bomb, who were still talking about killing him. Linus appeared shaken by how quickly they stopped talking when they noticed him walking towards them. Linus saw some water and Emma and Bomb gave their metal bottle to him as he chugged the water. Bomb reminded him that he could not drink all of the water, but Linus sneered at him and told him that he had helped them and they had to help him. Bomb told him to give the water, but Linus continued to laugh and continued drinking. Emma nodded at Bomb and he pulled Linus by the scruff of his neck, but was snarling at him and throwing him into the force field, which sounded as cannon instantly as Emma and Bomb sat down. 10 tributes remained on day 7, and so it was announced by the game makers that a flesh-eating virus would soon be released into the arena in 1 hour starting from the perimeter. That the only way to avoid being infected by this lethal disease was to take one of the pills that would be present in the cornucopia within half an hour of this announcement. Emma immediately realized that she might actually be able to win the games, and she glanced at Bob, then at Zax, before saying she was sorry. As Bob asked her what she meant, Emma punched him in the face and he staggered backwards before she slammed his body into the force field. Throwing his backwards in his cannon soon sounded. Emma grabbed his axe and turned around, eating a sandwich from her bag as she ran. She quickly reached the cornucopia and threw herself to the ground, waiting for the pills to appear. The pills appeared and all 10 of the tributes ran in. Salvatore from 10 appeared to be protecting some of the tributes, most of whom were young and emaciated. Emma rolled her eyes and grabbed her pill before charging at Salvatore, but just then Regime from 2 threw a knife at Emma, but she dodged it. Emma charged at Regime and he slowly crawled backwards, but as Emma threw her axe at him, he jumped backwards and was thrown forwards, due to him having collided with a force field. Emma glanced at the body of a tribute Regime had killed before turning to Salvatore, who was holding 6 tributes behind him. Emma slowly scoffed before walking backwards. Salvatore mocked Emma for a few seconds, before asking her if she really thought she was a career tribute. Emma listed all the things that made her a career tribute, and Salvatore scoffed, before telling her that he and his 6 allies could easily attack her. This time, it was Emma who scoffed, and she glared at Salvatore, before telling him she knew that she could win. She then flexed her fingers underneath her gloves and shoved her axe into the force field, before throwing it at Salvatore. As he had been holding all of the other tributes, they were all instantly killed, and Emma cheered out, realizing that she had just accomplished her goal of killing a huge amount of tributes in one go, having just killed 7 tributes. After her victory, Emma returned to District 7, where she held axe-throwing competitions in the town square regularly, in order to prepare the youths for volunteering. She got married and had 2 daughters, both of whom were acquaintances and good friends of Ash and Kapoor. The 125th Games were the 10th quinquennial quell. Despite having recently celebrated his 56th birthday, President Flickerman still looked rather young as he got ready to announce the quell twist for the 125th Games, also known as the 10th quinquennial quell. He sensed the anticipation in Snow's grin, making a speech about how happy he was that he had gotten to be the president of Pan Am for the past 40 quinquennial quells and the past 20 games. He wished the capital and district viewers alike luck, before announcing that this year's twist would be the opposite to the twist of the last quell, stating that in order to remind Pan Am that the war was led by men, 2 boys will be reaped from each district instead of 1 boy and 1 girl. The training academy in District 12 set up by Sarah Wellwood had finally become popular, with 17 male and 16 female tributes, meaning that overall 33 students were attending the academy and training to become careers. All 17 males were allegedly very excited for the games to begin, as they would all be able to volunteer, whilst 9 of the 16 females, who were all 18, felt dejected that they would never be able to volunteer anymore. Due to all 17 males volunteering, Sarah decided that they would engage in a question and answer session in the Hall of Justice. This year's victor was a 17-year-old from District 12 named Ness Walters. Ness was known for being a strong sword fighter, but spent most of his time training to become a peacekeeper. He could always be seen riding on his motorcycle throughout the district with his peacekeeper mentor. During the question and answer session, he answered all of the questions with no doubt and showed his confidence and determination to the crowd. However, they did not appear to enjoy him that much, and so as Sarah dismissed him, he flexed his arms, causing his suit to tear and revealing his bulging muscles. He answered in one of the 2 tributes, with the other being 18-year-old Pickaxe Klein. This year's games took place on a majestic cruise ship featuring various sea animals, a hurricane, and lasting for 6 days. At first, Ness appeared a bit confused to see that this arena was gradually cruising through the water as he stood on a central podium, and noticed Pickaxe a few podiums to his right. He nodded at Pickaxe and they both glanced at Maximus from 2, before the gong sounded and they both ran inwards. Despite having been asked to join the career pack, both Ness and Pickaxe had refused, due to their fear of Maximus, who towered over them and was able to rip a podium from the ground. Ness and Pickaxe both grabbed swords, before each slaying 2 tributes and running away. On the morning of the 2nd day, the 2 of them woke up to find that Maximus and the other careers had stolen their water. They groaned, but decided to explore the cruise, and after climbing up to the 2nd story of the ship, Pickaxe noticed that a type of water filter was in one of the rooms. Ness and Pickaxe immediately grabbed it, before running down to the first story of the ship and scooping up some seawater. But just then a large shark leapt out of the water, although Ness grabbed Pickaxe and protected them from any harm. As the day went on and the boys walked across the ship, looking for victims, they appeared to enjoy each other's company and made jokes, discussing their lives back in District 12. Pickaxe appeared envious of the fact that Ness had passed a peacekeeping test they had both taken the previous year, although Ness reminded Pickaxe that he could only become a peacekeeper if he won these games. Pickaxe muttered that he always wanted to be a peacekeeper for the honor, but Ness told him that he was only doing it so he could bring a little more money back home each month to his single mother and younger brother. However, later that night, the boys were sharing food and getting inebriated from rum their mentors, Rue and Sarah, had sent them, but they heard Maximus and the other couriers approaching. Ness once again pulled Pickaxe back in as they glanced at the other couriers, who had not appeared to notice them yet. The boys came up with a plan, and as Maximus and the others walked past them without noticing them, the boys from 12 slowly followed them. They continued following them over the next few days, waiting until they were at their most vulnerable. They noticed them all over the ships until they arrogantly threw themselves overboard and decided that they would swim for a bit before climbing back onto the ship. 5 of them did, but as they slept, Hermes from 1 decided that he would continue swimming for a while. However, as night fell on that day, a shark flew out of the water and bit off both of his legs. As he screamed in pain, Ness and Pickaxe jumped into the water and repeatedly stabbed him with their swords before grabbing his food and fleeing. By the start of the 6th day, it was just Ness, Pickaxe, Maximus, and Rascus both from 2, Jasper from 1, and Timbo from 7 remaining. The game makers immediately announced that a hurricane would begin in the sea and the ship would be sucked into it. They also stated that all of the tributes needed to make it back to the cornucopia on the 3rd story of the ship. As all 6 tributes ran for their lives and did not look back, the District 2 boys Maximus and Rascus killed Jasper along the way, and Timbo fell into the hurricane. The ship slowly began sinking, and the remaining 4 tributes screamed, with Maximus throwing Rascus into the eye of the hurricane before continuing to climb. As Ness, Pickaxe, and Maximus ran into the cornucopia, Maximus immediately laughed and threw one of his 2 swords at Pickaxe's back, which made him to fall. He and Ness both cried out as he fell and slid down the deck, before nearly falling into the eye of the hurricane. As the wind lashed at his face, Ness tried to help Pickaxe up, but he slowly breathed out and told Ness to tell his family that he loved them. Ness shouted out as Pickaxe handed him the sword before extending the middle finger at Maximus, before wrenching his arm free and falling into the hurricane, sounding his cannon. Ness began whimpering as his district runner was swept into the hurricane, and with a tear rolling down his cheek, he began a brutal sword fight with Maximus. Ness had 2 swords and Maximus only had 1, and as the deck became more and more vertical, Ness kicked Maximus in the head. As Maximus cried out in pain, Ness knocked his sword out of his hand before slamming all 3 swords into his opponent's body, which caused Maximus to fall into the hurricane, and his cannon sounded. Following his victory, Ness immediately returned to District 12 and continued his peacekeeper training, eventually becoming a private, before working in District 9 for a few years, then moving to the capital and then returning to District 12 to teach at the training academy alongside Sarah Wellwood. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you share the link with as many people as you know. I really hope to get to at least 1,000 subs by the end of by maybe June, so that this channel can grow like Christian's channel. Christian's channel is a benchmark for my own, and I hope to be as great as his. Thank you for those who enjoy listening to my videos. See you next time.